The 34th player in my 50 most relevant for 2025 was a popular name from the last few seasons, but is someone we have to have a conversation about yet again heading into the AFL Fantasy Dream Team and SuperCoach lockout, which is getting closer than you realize. Sam Flanders. What is he going to give us in 2025? And what role will he play? And regardless of where he plays, I still think he's a relevant name to discuss and consider as a starting squad and an upgrade option in 2025. Joining me on this podcast, it's the first time we've had him and the podcast he's part of the 50 most relevant. We've had conversations with them before as a part of the coaches panel. If you're a super coacher and you've been on YouTube, chances are you've come across the Centre Bounce podcast. Always a lot of fun when Big J and Joe get on talking super coach smack. But we've got Big J on the podcast talking about a guy that Sam Flanders was a popular name of conversation on the Centre Bounce podcast early last year, weren't you?
Yeah, 100%. Thanks for having me on. He's really polarizing player. A lot of people didn't pick him to start the season, but then by about round 4 or 5, they were like, holy moly, I need Sam Flanders in my team. So I was very lucky. I obviously tracked the preseason, put out all the videos and whatnot, and was like, Flanders, get in my team. I'm not sure if that's going to happen this year, though.
All right, we'll discuss that on this episode. Defender mid for us last year, so a little bit of positional change from mid forward last year into defender mid in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team. He had a seasonal average of 107.8, and you are spending over $1.1 million to get your hands on him in fantasy, and just about 8,000 short of that in Dream Team. So a big chunk of change. So it's a good thing you've got a bigger salary cap than super coaches, because in SuperCoach, a 119 average. He was outstanding, a $641,000, 500 price point. Big J, you talk about this polarizing figure last year in terms of we knew he was going to be a good option, but there were junctions and challenges that probably still sit through true in 2025 in terms of role and also buy, which we do need to get to later on in this episode. But his ability to play everywhere was incredible.
Yeah, I think he was a little bit like Tristan Cherry, where you hadn't really seen much of him the year before, had come in and out the side and whatnot, and then just totally exploded. I mean, 2023, he averaged 88, only played 14 games, you know, as a must-lock selection in our forward lines, probably not there, and it explains why a lot of people didn't start him, but they definitely must have had him towards the end. So, yeah, interesting kind of situation for him there.
When we talk about this fine run home at the end of 2023, it's what built confidence for some and curiosity for others that we would see what ultimately eventuated in 2024. He goes at 105 in AFL Fantasy and 106 in SuperCoach over that final 10 stretches of games. It was a very different role and game style that ultimately would see Damien Hardwick bring. But last year, a 107.8 average in fantasy, 14 tons. 5 over 120, including a 137, a monster 163, and a 73 was his only score under 87 all year, including that monster 163, which, by the way, is a career-high score in AFL Fantasy. He ranked 17th for points last year in fantasy and 10th by average, while over in SuperCoach, which I know is the format that the Centre Bounce covers more regularly, that 119 average was 20 tons, 10 monster 120-plus scores. So there's your vice-captaincy scoring, including a 141, a 152, and a career-high 161. Ranked 9th for total points, 6th for averages. And we cannot understate how important he was at that start of the season. 17 consecutive hundreds to start the year and nothing under 91. You mentioned it. Basically, from around 3-4, it was the chase to get him last year. And the earlier you got Sam Flanders in, probably determined just how successful your 2024 went.
Yeah, we got kind of shafted around 21, 22, because I don't think there's ever been a SuperCoach player that has had over 100 for the entire season. Like, no poor scores, no anything. 2 rounds, well, it was like 4 rounds to go. It finally happened with Flanders. So, a bit unfortunate there. But, yeah, I guess kind of the early rounds are so crucial as well that if you miss out on a type of player like him, who obviously was underpriced given role and scoring, you're half changing your team just to get this type of player in. Yeah, definitely one to watch there. And as you say, the early rounds are so crucial in SuperCoach because towards the end, most people have very similar teams that it's these kind of small decisions and being gutsy enough and risky enough to make those changes, which is the really big thing. It can be either successful or, hey, doesn't work out.
SuperCoach has some trends towards the AFL fantasy game, not in terms of the pricing cycle or the pricing movement, but in the sense of greater volume of trades, a greater risk profile can be taken with how you use them, the players you select. And it's becoming harder and harder, isn't it, to chase ground in SuperCoach. You used to previously at the back of the year, the final 6 to 8 weeks go, well, I've conserved some trades. I've got the chance to still be aggressive and a few things fall over in higher ranked teams. I might still get there. Whereas now, if you don't correct quickly when you make mistakes early, because starting squad's important, but the trading cadence is the most important part. By rounds 8, 10, if you're too far back in the pack, certainly in AFL fantasy, but definitely in SuperCoach, from a rankings game, it's good night, faster than ever before.
Yeah, I think it's a real balance because it comes down to how much risk do you start your team with? How many changes do you know you may have to change? A lot of mid-prices failing, rookies doing better. Hey, can I make 100K there or there? But I've actually been saved quite a lot. I think it kind of depends on, cool, you're not going to make rank 1 if your team's not great. But you can definitely make top 500, top 600. It's what's happened to me in the last couple of years. I jumped on guys like Logan Evans, Humphreys in the back end of the season as well. And when everyone else has primos that are out, injured, Sheasel and Houston, a few others like that, if you've actually got a playing defense or a playing, some rookies on the bench who are now scoring hundreds due to changes and whatnot, it can actually save your season there.
Yeah, it's so true. Building that squad depth.
Too bad.
Yeah, absolutely. We can take something from being pear-shaped to being salvageable from a seasonal perspective. Yep. Let's talk about probably the 2 key components that are stopping people from starting Sam Flanders, because we don't need to look too deep in those numbers to go, the guy can score and he's not a player that, only because he had the kick-in role did he score. Like, he had 9 games last year where he did take that distribution role half-back that none of us forecast that would come, but he went in an average of 120 in SuperCoach and 119 in AFL Fantasy in those games where he takes multiple kick-ins. But when then you break down that sort of the mid-forward split and then the pure mid-split, he's still scoring pretty darn well. Like, if he had 20% centre bounces or more last year, he goes at an average of 102 in fantasy and 119 in SuperCoach. So right on that average. And then if it's 60% centre bounces or more, it's a 101 average in fantasy and just clips a little bit in SuperCoach down to a 114. And so some might say, well, he's not going to have that distribution role. No, he's not going to score. But he showed last year across mid-forward, pure mid, and half-back, he's going to be a top-tier defender for us as long as he stays fit and healthy on the field.
Yeah, he's a little bit like Harry Sheasel, where I think Gold Coast just kind of found out halfway through the season, hey, let's put him in a position where he can get the ball and then good things happen. As you say, some games kick out, some games not kick out, some games it was pushing up the wing, running up and back, around everywhere. Felt like he had a little bit of the Tom Stewart type role where Gold Coast would put all the pressure in the forward line and then he would stand probably about the middle of the ground and catch the ball as the opposition kicked it out and just lock in that forward position. So, yeah, if you can play everywhere. My only problem with Gold Coast, and we'll touch on positions and whatnot a little bit later, I think, but something needs to change at Gold Coast for them to make finals, and I don't know if that's going to be where Sam Flanders plays or remove a little bit of his versatility so it gives other people options, because some of the games where he had huge amounts of disposals, I mean, one of the games versus the Giants last year, 43 disposals, and they lost.
Yeah.
And they lost quite heavily.
Yeah.
So if half of those disposals go to someone else, maybe that means that they're going to win that game, because instead of just kicking to Sam Flanders, they're actually kicking to someone who's going to put the ball forward 50. So, yeah, just a few things like that to work out. There's a lot of pressure on Gold Coast to do well this year, and maybe that means a little bit of Sam Flanders doesn't have this, like Luke Ryan with Fremantle, right? Little bit of take away his seagull role. Hey, look, they now start doing better.
Yeah, it's so true. And that distribution role that he inherited and that was trialled multiple different players through there. It was Sexton, Buderick had that at moments, but more of a lockdown small defender. We saw Powell have that for a week or two. Clearly the trades. Yeah, that's right. The trade arrivals of Daniel Rioli and John Noble, while different types of players, do really telegraph to us that Richmond weren't happy with that makeup Gold Coast rather, and happy with that makeup, and therefore we need to make some changes. Therefore, let's get a run and carry player like Rioli. Let's get a run and carry player like Noble, and Powell, if we can get some health into him. Okay, now we feel like defensively we're structured a little bit better. We've got the speed of ball movement that we know under a Damien Hardwick Richmond coach team that has now, for the Gold Coast, had a year's additional preparation and training in the preseason. I expect them to be closer to less ball-heavy retention, as you alluded to in that game against the Giants, but much more speed of movement, which is much closer to not only a Damien Hardwick team, but probably does give a little bit of some of that ceiling of Flanders might clip here a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. And another game, for example, was the loss versus Saints last year, where he had 42. It was a closer game, but, ball forward of centre there. And it's the amount of marks as well. They need to change from the chip pick mark position. So, they brought in a couple more runners, I guess.
It seems to be. So if he's not going to get that distribution role, well, he probably sits back into then the role that many, when he was recruited, thought that he would have and has now probably earned the right to have, which is playing some midfield minutes as a centre-bounce midfielder and then spending some moments across the half-forward line and using some of that just turn of body lateral movement that he's got. He's quite evasive, more so than people give him credit for. Probably the hope that he can craft and create some goals for us. I look at this midfield mix of the Suns, and Big J, I'm curious on your thoughts. Like last year's centre-bounce presence was clearly Anderson at 1 with an 81%. I'm intrigued to see in a moment if you think he goes a little more wing or holds that. Rao was number 2 at 76%. Miller lower than I think people realise, just the 61% centre-bounce attendances. And then the next kind of couple were Davies, although a low game number, 50% attendance. Graham, 41%, pretty consistent in the back 2/3 of the year. And then Flanders, real volatile. Some games 0%, other games up in the 70+ percentage. But over the year, it's a 31% attendance. And then we barely saw Humphrey in there last year. We didn't see Rogers. And now they've got another young kid in Leo Lombard. How do you forecast this Gold Coast, not just the inside midfield mix, but the outside of it as well? How do you forecast that to come? Because that might, alongside other reasons, create a reason to fade or to start him in our squads.
Yeah, I think it really shows as well. Correct me if I'm wrong, but 2024 was really Hardwick's first true season as the coach. So we kind of saw a few things that he was working out with the likes of Humphreys and whatnot. Tuke Miller will always be the servant. I think that's always been the knock on him and why he started SuperCoach at 600k, dropped off quite a lot. Some years he'll be good, some years not. He plays wherever. They say go tag and then his scoring drops down and just offers that versatility that maybe they don't have. In terms of midfield mix, it definitely feels like they are trying to push Flanders forward. So Rioli, Noble, like we've been talking about, he's definitely going to be in there. I don't know if he's going to be first rotation, but I hope that we don't see him move. You know how it was under Stewie Dew, where he played a lot of half forward and then some mid time, like he was at the end of 2023 and then 2024 he had that position. Their midfield is fairly stacked. I do reference North Melbourne as the midfield's quite strong. So if you put a new player in, he now has to play half forward mid, and unless, Lockie Neal or someone comes to the team that pushes someone out, there's a bit of a movement there. Lukosius has been obviously traded from Gold Coast, so maybe he takes what was similar to Lukosius' role and then they move things around. But as I said at the start, right, Flanders is a stopgap. Halfway through the season, if it doesn't work out, back to halfback. So we'll see.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see how they choose to structurally use him. the pieces that are, as you've mentioned, the pressure is coming onto Gold Coast more and more with so much high-end talent. They need to do that. And if it's not this year and not the year after, boy, what else does this club need? Because there is junior stars across every line and development and opportunity all flooding in there. And so we've looked at positionally for us that I agree with you that halfback and distribution won't be the first choice for him. Into that midfield, well, where he sits in that rotation, to me, it's clear Anderson and Rowell as the leaders of this midfield, and then third, fourth, fifth, sixth options. Well, it might be a combination of trial and error, the matchup of opponents that they like that they're coming up against head to head, whether they're going to use a tag, injuries that come. These variables to me feel like 3 to 6 who gets that next rotation sits there, let alone the replacement of goals of a Lukosius out. So there is some uncertainty, and that's what the preseason gives us. And the beauty is we do get a free look at Gold Coast in opening round. The downside of the free look of opening round is inside the first month of the season. After that, the team is going to be taking a week off. Yeah. And arguably, Gold Coast have the worst of the buys from a classic perspective for us, because we get one game and then they're gone. And for those that faded Flanders last year with the early buy, are probably going to find it hard to justify, because round 2 alongside GWS, it does find itself hard to justify with the positional unknown, even with the free look to go, yeah, I'll take him for one game and then he won't play.
Yeah, you make two good points, right? Flanders is so expensive. I mean, he's the most expensive defender. He's top 6? I'm just looking at it now. Top 6, like most expensive in SuperCoach, just in general. And if you've got questions, and ahs, where's he going to play? Mate, you're not paying top 6 price for that kind of player. The early buy as well kind of sucks, because if you look at it, they only share with one other team.
Yeah.
If he had round 3 buy,
sure,
you could see a time when, hey, someone might have a Sydney team, someone might have someone from Geelong. I mean, if a lot of people are stacking Bailey Smith, maybe you go someone like a Shai Bolton, you can get away with losing another 200K on field by taking Flanders. But if it's them or GWS, you might be the guy that starts Flanders and cool, it works out. But every game of that week, everyone's playing best 18, and majority of teams I've seen now have no Gold Coast and no GWS players in their teams. So if you're the one that now has a $9.5 million team and everyone else has a $10 million team, you're going to get punished further because it is best 18. So your other selections don't matter as much. You're one primo out. You're banking on, gosh, I hope one of these top 10 selections that I've got at 200K now pop out a primo score to cover Flanders not playing.
Yeah, and the expectation that a Travalia, a Lawler, a O'Sullivan, insert rookie name here, give me a 90, 110, 120, that we should be expecting our 40s and 50s to fall off during these best 18 rounds, not protecting a premium. Although I understand the strategy and you could build a team around it, it's just adding an element of risk that I think one of the things I'm curious on your take is, because he does play opening round and round 1 and then hits the bye, whereas for SuperCoach, so he's going to sit on the price cycle bubble. In AFL Fantasy, he'll have had a double price movement by then. But in SuperCoach, he sits on that price movement bubble, whereas for everybody else, it's going to be after round 1 and 2, they're going to be sitting on the price bubble on the presumption they're not in those other opening round teams. There are some guys like Luke Ryan, Jordan Clark, Harry Sheasel, just to name a few, that all will be on the bubble at the conclusion of round 2, heading into round 3. Should one of those guys not deliver the numbers you're expecting, could you see a world where you trade into Sam Flanders as early as round 3 on the premise that knocks it out round 0, knocks it out round 1, has the week off round 2? Can you see him being a parachute or an emergency lever that we pull for one of the premiums that might be going slow, should he start strong?
Yeah, it kind of just depends. I mean, there's two ways to look at it, right? The early rounds of SuperCoach definitely make corrections in your team. So if players aren't working there, generally you want to be sideways trading rookies because hey, Your premiums are the best guys, things like that. You want to lock in the guys that you want to select. You don't want to be like, well, in 2 weeks, I'm going to have to trade this guy out. Rookies make all the money and things like that as well. If Flanders was available in the forward line, I could see a time when we've had times with Jesse Hogan last year, for example, 2 monster games at the start of the season. Let's say he's playing North and West Coast. You know he's going to score 150 for both. You now spend a trade sideways into someone else who's more reliable because now he's playing a lot of really strong defender teams.
Sure.
Get that advantage at the start of the season, no worries. You've got 40 trades. You spend one. It's not the end of the world. To your point, though, I would be more than happy to not start Flanders. Let's say Harry Sheasel, positional change, something wrong happens, or another premium or something else. Maybe there's a rookie at 100K that I don't have that I really want. I can now offload a Kadeem Coleman plus someone who's cheaper and get Flanders in and not having a disadvantage and, almost make up for the amount of trades that I'm spending by getting that early player in as well. So there's a couple of instances there where it could happen.
Yeah.
But if you start your team in SuperCoach thinking, hey, I'm going to have to trade this guy out, you're not setting yourself up for success, right?
Yeah.
You've now got 36 trades versus everyone else's 40 just from your starting team.
Yeah, so true. Look, that early buy, the uncertainty of role, those two things combined do mean that the risk profile of starting with Sam Flanders becomes really high, let alone the price point you're paying for him, as Big J's mentioned. You're now dropping top 10 across the formats. Price availabilities, you just can't spend risk at that point. Take your risk at that mid-price breakout range. Take your risk on the injury guys. You should not have a risk profile at the top price. These are, if you are going here, these are guys, the hoped intent is they're anchors in your side that become luxury trade-outs in the back third of the year, if at all, rather than, as we've talked about, I'll pivot off Sheasel if that doesn't work. It's like, well, if it doesn't work at the top price point, it's probably not the right guy for you.
Yeah, the thing with 600K players, and you say the same thing about midfield as well, is that because of the magic number that these guys are going to drop in price at some point.
Yeah.
And it will probably be towards the start of the season just for the way that the league evens itself out. But I'm more than happy to start this player. Cool. Everyone else gets him at 580K. But at that point, I can now trade and bring someone else in who maybe is a breakout player, maybe is someone that I don't own.
Yeah.
There's no issues there.
Yeah. Look, even the fact you look at teams like a Melbourne, a West Coast, and Adelaide, they have 0 buys until right at the end. Gold Coast have 2 before any of those teams have it there. So you've got to factor not just the first buy in, you've got to look at the other in there and go, man, I could look at someone like the Eagles, the Demons, the Crows. While there might not be any premium defenders in those teams that you might be considering, just the overall structural makeup of your side might mean you could look at a Whitfield in your starting squad if you wanted it, a Green in your starting midfield if you like it. So you've got to take all these variables into account, make your squad that works for you, and then from there, you lock it in and you back yourself in and you hope that all things land. But on draft, Big J, he's up at the top end of the tree, not just in price point, but in average. I think the fact that he's going to be a D1 is just clear someone's first defender for them. But would you take him before a Harry Sheasel on a draft day? That, to me, is a more interesting question, who seems to be the legacy
it's
guy.
Hard to ask. Yeah. It's hard to ask because obviously you can see from the back, like I'm a North Melbourne fan. If I go and pick Flanders over Sheasel, it kind of doesn't work, right?
Yeah, the brand doesn't work.
If I was completely unbiased, if I was unbiased, okay. There's a time when you have to, but off air we were talking about draft formats and some use the early buy, some don't. You don't want to be the guy, especially in a buy round, right? Where your first pick of the whole team isn't playing and you're being punished for that.
Sure.
That's the only thing. Second round pick, 100%. Late first round pick, depending on if you're going 18, 12, 10 players, okay. But you don't want to be first, second, top 5 selection and then him not play the first 2 rounds of the season. It kind of doesn't work.
It's so true. Look, to me, I've probably got Sheasel across the formats just a little bit above Flanders for what I think he's going to do in 2025. But in that second, third round, if you just want a solid 100 defender, I even with the uncertainty of role and percentage splits and all those kind of things, I'm pretty confident that Flanders is going to be a really nice pick for us in 2025. Hey, mate, it's been so good talking about Sam Flanders with you. For people that either don't do SuperCoach or have not had a chance to be introduced to Centrebouts and the podcast and what you guys are doing, where can people find you, Big J? And what has Centrebouts podcast got lined up for us this pre-season?
Mate, find us on YouTube at the Centrebouts, the same on Twitter as well. We're live streaming every Monday. During the season, we do Mondays and Thursdays. It's a lot of fun. Usually kind of recap of how the season went that week and then heading into the season or into the next round on the Thursday. Heaps of pre-season content coming out. Got player reviews, got our teams kind of looking at each line, and then a lot of conversation topics. So what an example might be, hey, what happens with Houston out, not in Port Adelaide anymore, and trying to figure out where the opportunities and stuff are. Because with SuperCoach, AFL Fantasy, you can do a couple of trades every week, right? And you're not really punished. There's no, number that kind of runs out. With SuperCoach, the work that you do in the preseason kind of defines a little bit of your season. So the amount of knowledge and stuff you can gain from that in the preseason, it helps you quite a lot, even if you don't bring the guys in straight away.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, mate, it's been a pleasure talking with you on this episode. I'm sure we'll chat to you again at some point during the 2025 preseason or season proper. If you missed any of those places that Big J mentioned around their podcast, social media, where you can get in touch with them, we've got it in the description of this episode, so you can go and check it out. Just click through. It's all there. Seriously, the guys bring a ton of fun to the SuperCoach conversations, but also plenty of information as well, and are highly interactive too. So if you want to work with a content creator that you're like, I just love it when they actually answer my question. I haven't seen the boys not have a question asked and not answered on a live stream. So make sure you jump in. They're always a heap of fun. If you want to go back and check out any of the other players revealed so far in the 50 most relevant on YouTube, where we're watching this right now, you can see the North Melbourne memorabilia yourself on Big J's mantle. You can go and check that out. Comment below if you are watching. What do you think Flanders is going to average in 2025? And what position do you forecast him to play? If you're listening to this as an audio podcast, you haven't subscribed or given us a 5-star rating, we'd love for you to do it. It makes a huge impact for us here on the channel. And inside the description of this episode, also the details to get in touch with the Centrebouts podcast, get in touch with us, become a part of our Patreon, and get your hands on some Coaches Panel merch, which has been flying out the doors the last couple of days. We do give an extra special gift if you get some. What it is? You got to buy some to find out what that is. All right. We are 34 players down, give or take, through the 50 most relevant. Would you like a clue about who's next? All right, I'll give you one. Let's see if you can guess this one as you're listening. This player was started with supreme confidence by the community that he would yet again stay at the upper echelons of his line. And yet, while not being a bad pick, did not stay in the upper echelons of his line. And it was maybe a flag to all that may be looking for a little bit of value in that line, let alone in any line, might be the way you should consider playing the game. He was a good pick last year. He was a great pick the year before. And what will he do for us in 2025? I still think he's pretty relevant. Could find his way back to the top if a few things go his way. Who am I talking about? You'll find out tomorrow in the 50 most relevant.